technology taking over everything, is now reaching its climax. Childhood has now been breached. Childhood is no longer this sacred period, protected.
Give me some examples. How has it been breached?
I want to actually start with the first area of this growth, these three periods that was breached. Yeah. And that was the period from 14 to 13 through to 19.
The second phase.
The third phase.
Third phase.
Because this was the first one that went.
Yes.
And this was catastrophic. After the war, in the 50s, the Madison Avenue, which is the great place of the advertisers and the etc. They were looking for new markets, and they saw that the young American from the age of between 13 and 19 was going to have money. They were working at the weekends. They had evening jobs. They had very generous pocket money. So what they did is they invented a new category for their marketing. And they came up with the term, with a new name, teenager. They invented the term teenager.
Is that so?
Yes. I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
You just go and look it up. They invented the term teenager.
Yeah.
Most of the terms we use are invented somewhere along the line. Yeah. But this was invented in the 50s.
Wow.
And so what you had then was a teenage culture. Already the youth were unhappy. I don't know whether you're aware of a film which came out during the time, Rebel Without a Cause. Dean, what was his name? James Dean.
James Dean. Yeah.
And this whole aspect of being against, not knowing why. And they harnessed this, and out of it became a culture. Music, teenage music. If you think of it, all the music that arrived, the pop music, came out of that period. The clothes, they started becoming distinct about, in terms of their clothes and everything. And of course, the sexual behavior. So and what was important about it, it was a world which was contained within itself. It broke from the adult world. It became against the adult world. You got this separation. At the very time when it is essential for the child to connect with the adult. This was the beginning, this was a great break.
This is the period of apprenticeship.
This is a period of apprenticeship. Yeah. This is a period when the child is the friend of the adult. When the child's ideal is to become adult. One of my sons went through adolescence like a breeze. He had no problem. He was a musician. And as a musician, he was already dealing with adult music as a child. His heroes, he was a violinist, and his heroes were the great violinists. He wanted to be like them. So this was a connection. This was a connection with the adult world. So this break, this creation of this consumer culture, this new youth, which also released at the most powerful period of their sexuality when they're going through this whole metamorphosis, and capturing that into a continuous culture. I always say President Clinton was an adolescent, because you never grow up, and the only way you do grow up is through terrible calamity, experiencing disasters as a human being. Your marriage breaks up, or this happens, or that's and you go through suffering to be able to become mature.
Yeah.
Whereas the traditional way is you are beautifully you're beautifully brought into maturity. But we have to bring in the angst. We have to bring in the suffering of those adolescents. And each of them in a situation where they don't know their identity.
Tell me, why would it be so important for capitalists, for this consumer industry, to separate this teenager from the adult?
I don't think they're interested at all in the consequences.
Ah.
They're just looking for markets.
Right.
So they just see a market. Ah. I mean, the consequence. It's like for goodness sake, the whole modern world is full of unintended consequences. I mean, did the great scientist, what's his name? The one who was associated with the atom bomb.
Oppenheimer. Yeah.
No, the other one. The great
Einstein.
Einstein.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm an old man, so you have to put up with me. But Einstein was devastated when the unintended consequences of his great his great idea came into existence. So these people are not interested. They were interested in the market. And they were very excited when they found this market. And it's become a huge market.
Right.
And it's become a huge world. And it's like a block. It's like a prison. The children are there. And they have to break out of that prison if they're going to be, if they're going to survive. And it's a very dangerous prison. You know, it was a problem of big problem with mothers, single mothers, teenage mothers having children, not knowing, having no structure, nothing, no base for them, drugs, alcohol, every kind of experiment. So you're putting the children through that kind of a terrible experiment.
Right.
It was a horrific thing that happened. But then what happened was that they came and looked at the question of childhood. Now, the problem with this one is that it is adults, marketeers, looking at childhood and thinking they understand it. So what they've done is they've been creating, first of all, toys. But toys which are complete. Plastic toys, funny colors, because they think childhood is all about being, being funny and silly and all the rest of it. So funny color. The child is literally, it's like giving them heroin or something. They're excited by it. The adrenaline rises. It's exciting when they see these things. But then they play with it a bit and they get bored. And very often you'll find with these toys they break them because there's nothing in it for their imagination. And then it gets deeper because you've got toys. Well, with toys they can make up games and they can do things with it. But when it comes to films, they sit there mesmerized. And the thing about the films, the children's films, is that they all treat the child as though the children are sort of, half-baked. I mean, everything has to be funny and everything is, it's the adult coming down to the level of what they think childhood is. Childhood, and they're literally giving them a kind of an imagination from outside, which is their idea of childhood. And then it comes to the mobile phone and the screen. And that becomes completely mesmerizing. So what is taking place? The child should have needs nothing from outside.
Yeah.
It needs nothing from the adult world in order to engage it. It needs its own community. It needs maybe books and things that they can play with and you look at and all the rest of it. It needs the natural world where they can see birds and they can see trees and they can go into woods and they can, have contact with animals. All of this. All of which they are experiencing. Stories, when people tell them stories, it's their own imagination that is working. You tell me, if somebody is telling you and I a story, your imagination is seeing it completely differently from the way I am seeing it.
Yeah.
It's unique.
Yeah.
So what is happening is that the technology is getting more and more sophisticated to engage the child who becomes a completely passive receiver. In the process of becoming a passive receiver, when the thing stops, it starts to panic. In other words, we are creating addiction. This is what addiction is. It's a dependency on something that is outside of you. It's something external that comes and you become dependent upon it. And the children become dependent upon these external imagination that comes from the adult world. And may I say, a very corrupt adult world. Because the images are becoming darker and darker. The illustrations of the books and things are becoming darker and darker. And so and what is absolutely horrifying is that the children are all being fed the same imagination. And this is why I talk about the dialysis of the imagination. The dependency upon an external cause, an external stimulus. And that means that when they arrive at the age of 7, they have become completely isolated. Because what has actually happened is that what they share with their peers is the same imagination. They're talking about the same, film or the same thing or the same whatever it is. Now, obviously, I'm putting to you the extreme situation. But any of us who have brought up children or have grandchildren are aware of this. We see what happens to them when they get a mobile phone. They become completely mesmerized by it, hypnotized. Yeah. So obviously, I have to also say that the power of the human spirit is so great It's so great that you cannot just destroy it like that. You can't completely demolish it, but you can deeply hurt it. So when the child arrives at that age, it is confused about its identity. It has not grown into its own being. It hasn't had a natural upbringing. And it is frightened, because the world is a very frightening place, and it's been exposed to it. And then they are presented with the latest piece of modernity, which is the eradication of the idea of gender.